It just keeps expanding. I was in Indianola a few months ago, and I was talking to someone who works at the Department of Public Welfare here, and she told me that the state of Iowa is going to get fined if they don't sign up more people onto the Medicaid program. They're just pushing harder and harder to get more and more of you dependent upon them so they can get your vote. That's what the bottom line is. I don't want to make people's lives better by giving them somebody else's money. I want to give them the opportunity to go out and earn the money and provide for themselves and their families. And the best way to do that is to get the manufacturing sector of the economy rolling again.
Sharon, aren't you grateful that he wants to make your life better? You know, because you only have 8 jobs.
That's
and,
right.
you know, if you would just stop taking the welfare. I mean, look at that assumption, right?
Yeah. It's really disturbing to see something like that, especially coming from the national level. Here we have a person who's running for the highest seat in the land. And supposedly, because he wants to represent the entire American population, which, if no one's noticed, includes a bunch of black people. I watched that several times when it was aired, and one of the things that I found most disturbing is that most of the political punditry focused on whether or not he made a political mistake in making that statement. No one really has delved into the underlying message. Why is it that someone running for a national level office can use or can leverage off the fears of white people in this post-racial society and get away with it, and actually choose to do that because he thinks it's going to put him in a better position?
You know, now, one show that did cover the substance behind it is The Young Turks, I'm proud to say. And one of the things we pointed out was that in people getting food stamps in Iowa, it turned out to be 84% white. Okay, 9% black.
84% of white of everything is in Iowa, right?
Right, that's true. But that's a good point. But look, if you look at Iowa again, for Medicaid recipients, 74% white, 13% Hispanic, 8% black. So, you know, Keith, I think it goes to the assumptions that's in this guy's head. And, you know, there's was a debate as to whether he did it on purpose to get, you know, racist votes in Iowa, or if he just kind of said it. I actually think that he actually thinks it, and that he said it because he thinks it, that it wasn't planned out.
Yeah, it seems pretty sincere to me, and it's. I don't think it's such a big surprise. I don't think it's a surprise to black people that he would say something like that. What we're seeing with this election, with a bunch of the Republican-run states putting in all these voter hoops and things to jump through, we're seeing regression as far as trying to subdue voters, and we're seeing just things going backwards. We're seeing the education system going backwards. We're seeing a lot of stuff going backwards. So it seems like old times to me, race baiting.
Yeah, where do you come out on that, Frank? Do you think he was race baiting? Either?
Well, yeah, I've kind of come down on the side of what a lot of people have been saying about Rick Santorum is that, you know, unlike Mitt Romney, who is just pandering, Rick Santorum sincerely believes his crazy beliefs. You know, they're deeply held. And I actually heard some coverage last night of people were praising him for that. And I think it doesn't matter if you have a guy who sincerely believes that or who's just pandering, you're still going to get the same bad result. And you described it as a disastrous point that he made. And by disastrous point, do you mean the point that propelled him to victory in the caucus? Because it's
even if it wasn't intended, you're right, Frank. It wound up not hurting him at all.
No.
I mean, we don't know if it helped him, but it certainly didn't hurt.
That's the overall. You know, it's like you said. There's nothing new about this, and I think it's been the overall point of view of conservatives that, you know, white people have to be afraid of. Black people are taking away, you know, the conservative point of view is back in the 50s, everything was so great. Why can't we go back to that wonderful time? In other words, that wonderful time when black people and a lot of minorities had no rights whatsoever. White people got everything back then. And I think not just Santorum, but the entire Republican Party is is trying to appeal to that in certain white voters.
And you know, it's not just the political leaders, it's the commentators as well. When you hear Rush Limbaugh over and over again with, oh, his welfare state, Obama's welfare state, and you know, he
said that everything Obama is doing is about reparations to black people, which was one of the most crazily racist things I've heard.
I mean, I wish Obama was actually looking out for black folks more, right? I mean,
Me too.
right? I mean, we have disastrous, you know, foreclosure situation for all Americans. When you look at some of the numbers that how the minority community is getting affected, and Professor Cornel West talks about this all the time. I mean, let me ask you, Professor Kyle. I mean, do you get a sense that President Obama has been, you know, better to the minority community, or has gone out of his way to help the minority community? I honestly don't get that sense.
No, I don't get that sense at all. However, I have to say that the president understands the climate, the racial climate that exists today in America. Here we are in 2012, but if you look at the numbers, we look from an educational standpoint, we have more segregated schools in the country today than we did in 1954 when Brown v. Board of Education was decided upon. We have more segregation in our churches. We have more segregation in our communities. When you think of communities where people live, where people working, the president understands the climate, the racial climate, and he has to walk very gently around these issues, particularly because he is a black man and the first black president.
Yeah, I wish he wouldn't walk so gently. I mean, today he does some recess appointments, which is a strong way to go. And what happened? Everybody gave him all the credit in the world. They're like, oh, strong leadership. So why doesn't he do that more often, I think? I mean, look, to your point on segregation, Koch brothers are actually funding groups to go and resegregate the schools in North Carolina. That's to your point, we're going backwards here. I can't believe how backwards we're going. But you know, let me bring up a controversial guy, Ron Paul, who's also in the Republican race, with the newsletters, et cetera. But he makes an interesting point where he says, look, I think the number one problem, or the number one way that we could help minority communities is by getting this senseless drug war. It relates to another topic that we had on the point on an earlier week when Richard Branson tweeted out saying this amazing fact that there are now more black men in jail today than there were slaves in the beginning of the Civil War.
That's right.
Which is amazing.
That statistic came from an exhaustive research project that was conducted by Michelle Alexander and published in her recent book, The New Jim Crow, where she talks about where black men stand today and makes a comparison, does an analysis, a comparison between the Jim Crow South and black men today, and how formerly incarcerated and felons now are treated in the same manner that black men were treated back in the 1920s and 30s.
And, you know, we talked about that on the Young Turks, and Keith, I want to throw this to you. I mean, some think, well, this is another way to, you know, go back to the situation that we were in. You lock up people for nonsense, and you do it disproportionately. You know, white people, whether they're buying cocaine, selling cocaine, et cetera, get arrested at a much, much lower rate as a percentage, et cetera. And then now they have private prisons where they profit off of it. And then they're making the prisoners do basically slave labor. I mean, that is white, black, Hispanic, doesn't matter, right?
Exactly.
So, I mean, do you think all this stuff is on purpose?
Of course. It's a huge industry, and it's cheap labor, and it's a way to keep what was going on a long time ago, just in a way that convinces people that, oh, well, you know, they shouldn't have broke the law, or they shouldn't have done this, you know, so they shouldn't have any rights in prison. That's the thing that drives me crazy, is when I hear people say, well, they shouldn't have broken the law, so now they're in prison. And it's just like, when I do slideshows at youth prisons and stuff, I see kids that are in there for something that everybody I knew in college did several times over. They just didn't get caught because they weren't, you know, that they didn't have the cops all keeping an eye out, just waiting for them to screw up in any way, shape, or form. So it's, when I speak to kids like that, I just say, like, you ever see those cartoons where a pretty woman walks by a construction site and all the construction workers are drooling at them? I say to those kids, like, that's what police are. That's what you are to police. You are that one that they're going to have their eye on. So, like, it's in your best interest. You want to piss society off is just, if you make it through to adulthood without any problems whatsoever, you know?
Yeah,
and it's
fight
a tough,
the man by not,
it's a tough way to go. I mean, it's it makes me think of that article where if I was a poor black kid.
You hit up on our producer Jared Jackson's favorite article, meaning most despised article.
Yeah.
He brought that up again today. He does it all the time because it's a guy who wrote in Forbes magazine, if I were a poor black kid, I'd just study harder, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but we just did a segment today on the show where we showed a cop planting drugs in a black guy's car, and he got caught by his own dash cam, the camera that they have on his dashboard. The idiot didn't realize it and got caught on tape. And JR was saying, yeah, if I were a poor black kid, I'd have drugs planted on me. Then what am I going to do? Am I going to study hard from jail? Right?
It seems like the best way to stay out of jail, that maybe all kids should learn, is to become a Wall Street banker and plunder our nation's wealth and bring our economy to the brink. That will keep you out of jail.
But Frank, that's a great point now, and I want you to address that as our last point here, because this stuff, demagoguing against other races, and honestly against class too, like the poor, etc.,
right,
works so much better. Or maybe it's because that's the only thing they're trying. Whereas, shouldn't Americans be so much more mad about the $7 trillion that the bankers took off the Fed,
right,
the $700 billion that they took off of TARP? You're worried about welfare? Somebody getting money from welfare? They took over $7 trillion, the bankers.
Yeah, well, but the whole attitude is, if you're poor, it's your own fault. There's nothing. If you're arrested, if you're sent to jail, and you're not a Wall Street banker, then you only have yourself to blame.
Yeah, it's easy to kind of direct your anger towards an individual than a corporation.
And I think that the story is shaped and molded by the corporation. So we have the media that is basically controlled by corporations, and they are the ones that frame the story, that help the masses to have this deep-seated fear of blacks, or to believe in these welfare queens. So it's propagated by those who benefit from the masses believing it.
There were several stories on Fox News, which I'm sure you're aware of, about how do poor people really have it that bad? A lot of them have microwaves, some of them have television sets, some of them are really extravagant, they have refrigerators. I mean, these are, it sounds like I'm joking, but they actually did. Bill O'Reilly and John Stossel actually did a whole segment about that, and it's you can't make that stuff up.
And Rush Limbaugh once said, "Well, if these kids that need these assisted lunches and free lunches, they're hungry, why don't they just go to the fridge?" Like, he literally said that, right? And my last point on this is, if you want to get angry at welfare queens, the person you should be angry at is Michelle Bachmann. Michelle Bachmann. Her family took over $250,000 for their farm. And then she turns around and says, oh, can you believe people are living off the government? Why don't you give us the $250,000 back, and then we'll talk about who the welfare queen is, okay?